Hey, and welcome back to Threads of Voices. I'm Nikita Turk, and this is a space where creativity, community, and purpose all come together through honest conversation. Our show was born from Mentor a Promise, a nonprofit in New York City where students and families facing housing instability come together to rebuild not just their futures, but their voices. Every episode, we sit down with artists, designers, and community leaders to explore how art and humanity weave together, because every story really is a thread in something bigger. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Raylene Marasco, the founder of Dyenamix, a one-of-a-kind dye studio that's been bringing color, texture, and innovation to New York's creative world for more than 30 years. Hey, Raylene, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for hopping on with me. I kind of like to kick things off by learning about the why. Like, what first pulled you into the world of color, of fabric? Why'd you decide to dedicate your creative journey to this?
Well, from a young age, I was always encouraged to be creative. I come from a family where my mother was quite creative, and my grandfather was actually a tailor from Italy. And when they came over from Italy, he was a tailor. And so fabric has always been part of my life. Although that wasn't my original path. I'm actually trained as a conceptual sculptor. And so although fabric was part of my life, it wasn't my original path. I was really trained as an artist, as a fine artist. But creatively, it was always part of my journey. And so my mother was very creative, always made our Halloween costumes, always was making drapes for the house, and always was just a creative person. So growing up, we were always in art classes, and we were not, my sister and myself were both artists. So my sister actually was a graphic designer and now has an interior design business. And so this was just always part of our lives. So finding our way to creative businesses was just always seemed to be the journey that we were destined to be in.
Yeah. That's funny. That's funny. It's kind of like when you think about kids who come from long lines of like doctors or whatever, you follow the path that your parents help mold around you. And I love that your parents focused on bringing art into your lives. I think it's important for kids to have that creative outlet. Do you and your sister ever get to collaborate? Because your work seems like it sort of gels a little bit.
Well, interestingly enough, she's called on me to produce fabrics now for her interior design projects. So that's been really great and really exciting and fun to do together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm trying to imagine working with my sister.
We're quite different. So that's been interesting, so, it's we don't do it often. Let's just say that.
It's probably for the best of the health of your relationship that you do.
Exactly.
Oh, that's great. I kind of like I think about like when I'm going to buy a piece. Sometimes it could be the most basic item of clothing or something, but it's the fabric that really speaks to me and almost has like its own voice. And I think that it can kind of make and break a design. What do you think? And especially since you studied sculpture and like that was your initial path, what do you think that textiles can express in a way that maybe a sculpture or a painting can't?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that we as human beings, fabric is such a part of our lives. And when we work with fashion designers, what's really fascinating and interesting is that we'll work with them about the silhouette, and they come to us and they'll say, oh, what fabric techniques do you have that you're working on that are new? And often it's so collaborative that the fabric starts to dictate the silhouette, or the garment will start to change based on the techniques that we're offering. So it becomes so collaborative. And the fabric, you put on a dress, and it really starts to change how you feel.
Oh,
And,
absolutely.
a silky fabric all of a sudden makes you feel so different,
Yeah.
and we work on films, and we work on television shows, and we'll work with costume designers, and they'll start to talk to us about the character and how the character development has the costume has so much to do with the character and the mood and what the character is all about. So you start to realize that the color and the fabric and the texture and all of that plays so much a part of who that character is, and also just how we feel as people. So, you put on sort of a swishy dress, or, a skirt
Yeah.
that swirls around you, and like you move differently, and you
So
feel
true.
different, and it's like, and you don't really think about it until you put that garment on, or you pull on a cozy sweater, and it feels different, and it makes you feel differently. And you're not feeling well, and you want to put on a big cozy sweater and wrap it
Yeah.
around you, and you start to realize that fabric really makes you feel different. And even colors, I strangely only wear black. And I mean, every single day of my entire life, I wear
That's so
black.
surprising
So,
to me seeing
yeah,
your
I mean,
portfolio.
yeah, exactly. And people always say that to me, like, do you really only wear black? And I say, yes, you see me every day, but it's because I'm so inundated by looking at color,
Mm.
and that I only wear black, but I see how color affects people, and I see how being around color can really transform a person, and I see how it transforms the way it affects me, and when I'm around, a beautiful blue, and I go, oh my God, like that
Yeah.
blue, that blue is amazing, and
Yeah.
or that fabric, that luscious velvet,
Yeah.
and that can really transform you and your
Yeah.
feeling. And so I love that. I love that tactile quality is in all of us. Like
Yeah.
we all are affected by fabric, whether we want to be or not.
Yeah.
It's part of our lives. So, whereas paintings or sculptures or fine art is not necessarily part of our everyday lives.
Right.
So, but fabric is.
I like watching commentary from major films with like the costume designers and how they talk about like we went through 60 yellow dresses before we found the right one, and it seems like ridiculous, but then when you actually see it in the movie, you're like, I cannot imagine any other garment in this moment. It really does, to your point, it really does like help shape the story.
Well, even modern day, people assume with film, when it's a period film or a period television show, of course they're costumes. But when it's even modern day, they're costumes. We're
Yeah.
still making those costumes. Those pink shorts that are called for in that film are the perfect shade of pink for
Right.
a reason. They
Yeah,
are dyed
exactly.
by us, for a reason. We actually dye a lot for the television show Severance, and it's
Oh,
so highly stylized.
yeah.
And you don't think about it, but it's like, well, those costumes are that television show is so stylized anyway.
Yeah.
But we do a lot for the sets and the costumes, and it's so specific. And if you watch it, you realize, oh yeah, they're all wearing that shade of green or
Yeah.
that shade of blue, and then there's threads throughout the sets, and it's like, well, we dye all that, and
Yeah.
the bath towels are the same color as their sweaters, and
Wow, the
you start
detail.
to pick up on those things, right? And maybe you don't even consciously realize it, but it all adds to this general feeling. So, yeah, it's so important.
Yeah, it is. So I know, like, I mean, you mentioned Severance, and you've worked on a lot of different, museum pieces and things like that, all bringing your style still in your voice. What have you learned when working with some of these bigger franchises and things like that, telling their story, but like still finding ways to infuse your own creativity and your own voice?
Well, one of the amazing parts about collaboration is being able to sort of bring our creativity to their voice also. You have to, working with someone like Ralph Lauren and then working with Calvin Klein is very different, right?
Right.
So their aesthetic is quite different. But you also want to bring your aesthetic and your creativity to both of those people, or to Gilded Age versus Severance. They're very
Yeah.
different
Exactly.
looks, so it's being able to think in the mind of the client, but bringing your input and what you have to the table as well. And I think that's what our strength is being able to bring our artistic integrity and our creativity, but retaining the voice of the client, because every project is so different.
Right.
So it's their voice with our input.
I like that. I like that phrasing. Their voice with your input. It's like you using your magic to help tell their story. I don't know. I like the way that you phrase that. Um, Gosh, I gotta imagine some of those conversations are pretty interesting. I feel like the work that you do with your studio Dynamics, it's almost kind of like it's an art and a science, right? It's almost like a sort of a lab where you go through a little bit of experimentation, and you kind of touched on that before. How do you go about taking some of these ideas and actually making them happen? Because I gotta imagine that there's some like test and learn that comes along with that.
We're constantly experimenting and exploring techniques through traditional processes and integrating new technology. So we're constantly exploring new ideas. And that way, when a client comes with a concept, we have already done some experimentation. We have a rack of samples that they can come and look at. And those experiments we have already established to be tried and true explorations. And so when they come, they're able to look at those, uh, choose from that rack, and then we develop from that. So they'll come and they'll say, "Oh, this we have a concept to something that we want to look like leather, but not be leather, and have a pliability, and do all of these different. We want to use these different materials, but we want it to have this kind of look." And I'll pull off the rack. Well, what about this? What about that? And then we'll work from there. So we're constantly exploring and experimenting behind the scenes long before people walk through the door.
Yeah.
We worked on a project called Megalopolis for Francis Ford Coppola, and the brief was, we want you to invent a textile that's never existed before.
Oh,
um,
never a dull day for you.
exactly. I don't quite know how to answer that brief, but and it wanted to be post-apocalyptic future, was the idea of this film. So it was techno fabrics, but looking like something you'd never seen before. So we got free reign to just play with these sort of athletic fabrics and just do crazy techniques. It was super fun.
Yeah. Wow.
So we came up with some great things that were used in the film.
Yeah. Wow, that's exciting. That's a fun brief. I've got to imagine you won't get many like that says make something from scratch that's never existed.
Yes, and sometimes that is daunting, and sometimes that's exciting, and sometimes that's a completely unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
But we rise to the occasion. Those
Yeah.
always fun.
Yeah, good. At least you're enjoying it. How do you go about balancing? Because I know that you still do a lot of like traditional hand painting and things like that, but also you're not afraid of technology and you've really embraced some of these modern things. How do you go about finding that balance of mixing the old with the new?
Well, I think you have to move forward with the times. You always have to be embracing sort of the next piece of technology. And I think that, but having always a nod to the hand, I don't ever want to lose the human aspect of the work. I think that that's so important.
Agree.
When everything changed from hand work to computers, I saw this evolution of everything looking the same. And we retained hand painting and we use technology to be able to do multiples and
Mm.
scale up, but we were scanning everything done by hand, and that's still what we're doing. So for instance, when someone says, oh, we want a cloud background, I will still paint the clouds, scan them, and then digitally print clouds. But I'm still hand painting the clouds. Whereas another studio might generate the clouds digitally.
Got
And
it.
I think there's a difference.
Absolutely is.
It doesn't
Absolutely.
look the same.
Yeah.
So I want to retain those hand generated techniques.
Yeah.
And I think that's what separates us. And I don't want people to just rely solely on AI
Yeah.
and
That's what I was thinking.
ChatGPT, write, continue to write, think, I'm shocked that people say they're not using cursive, they're not, writing,
Yeah.
they're not thinking, they're not drawing, they're not painting. I'm shocked. And when textile artists come to me, I ask them to bring their sketchbooks. I ask them to bring their portfolios, and they bring me their iPads or they bring me
Mm.
and I said, well, where's your fabric? Oh, I don't have any. You're a textile person. I want to feel your fabric. So
Yeah.
that to me is surprising and a little disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I remember being a kid and having to clunk through like projects and stuff, with my little terrible drawings and stuff, and that was like part of the experience. And now they can have like my little niece and nephews, they know how to digitally design images that they can just print out and put up, like they can put in prompts. Yeah, I have this conversation a lot about finding ways to use technology to make your work a little easier for yourself, but not taking away the human element of it, which I think
Yeah,
you're
we
spot on with.
we have a constant conversations with the garment district and how tailoring is a dying art.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine has a pleating business and pleated fabrics,
Oh,
and
cool.
it's 100-year-old generations of pleaters in his family. he's the last of the generations. And,
Wow.
we talk about what will happen and what's happening with the garment district, and where are the people that are the next generation of tailors, the next generation of sewing people for the garment district, and where are those people? Where are my dyers? Where are my
Yeah.
silk screeners? Where are the
Yeah.
people that are, where are those people? Because there is not the next generation. And we are, as a community of garment workers, saying we need people that want to do this type of work, and the artisans that want to do beading and embroidery and dyeing and painting and all of these things. So we hope that there is a community of artisans that we can train and teach, that want to carry on these beautiful traditions.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to get you on TikTok. We need you on there teaching teaching the Gen
Yeah.
Zers how to, you know.
Yeah. And do they
Yeah.
want to learn is often the question. And do they have the patience because of this world of fashion? And,
Yeah.
oh, I can go on Google and just learn that in 5 minutes. It's like, well, it's not, it is a slower process. It
Yeah.
does take a lot to learn.
It does. You mentioned fast fashion, and I kind of want to touch on that because I feel like the fashion world is having some big conversations right now about sustainability. How do you go about thinking about the environmental impact that you're making when you are designing?
Well, one of the things that's wonderful about digital printing, we adopted digital printing in 1999, and we were
Oh,
very early pioneers in that industry. One of the things about that is very little waste. We are able to engineer pattern pieces so that you are cutting and sewing with very little waste. So that's an amazing opportunity for our clients to minimize the waste and really just produce exactly what they need. We are able then to produce in this country with very low minimums, and produce with very minimal water waste, very minimal use of low impact dyes, and keep it environmentally very friendly.
yeah.
So there's minimal waste for textile waste, minimal water waste, and that keeps it as environmentally friendly as we can do. It
Yeah.
also keeps it in this country, which is great,
Yeah.
and encourages our the business to stay in the U.S. versus overseas. So we're very proud of that initiative, and keeping things here as much as possible. It's off also. We offer a pigment alternative, which is water based, and that is also environmentally very friendly. So we use as much non toxic materials as possible. And we don't do polyester dyeing. So we're keeping things as environmentally friendly also as possible. I wish that our clients were as environmentally friendly as we were, or as we hoped they would be. We offered organic alternatives. They are more expensive, and that is always a factor,
Right.
So, but I think that people are understanding the sustainability impact and the impact of fast fashion, and they are more conscious of the factories, at least overseas, that they are using, and they're becoming more conscious of who are those factories
Yeah.
when they're using the overseas factories for costs. I can only control so much.
Right.
We don't manufacture garments, And I do know that the clients are understanding who the factories are, and they're doing more research to understand who are the factories are we working with, and are their practices environmentally sound? Are they working with factories that are treating their workers better? Because I have to say, they weren't that conscious of that.
Yeah.
They were looking at costs only. So they're at least a little more conscious of their practices, sustainability wise. Perhaps they're looking at the materials that they're using a little better, and their practices.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic that you've been able to build a successful brand while still being thoughtful about the footprint that you're leaving behind. What do you think that other creative brands can do to, I don't know, I guess to kind of think about the impact that they have and eventually help shape some of these systemic changes? Because I feel like if collectively everyone was making some of the same steps that you'd be doing, then, I think we'd be in a lot better shape. So what do you think that brands could potentially do to start?
Well, I think unfortunately the bottom line is cost.
Yeah,
And
that
I
makes sense.
think, that's what it comes down to. And I think that as a society, we are forcing the manufacturers to keep the costs down. And that is what's driving them to be forced into situations where they're constantly looking for less expensive
Yeah.
alternatives. And that is what drives them to work in countries where I think the practices are less than ideal. And until that, we as American society can get our costs down.
Yeah.
And I think we have limited resources in order to do that. And until we can do that, I don't know how much change we have the ability to make. The big brands have to be making those changes. And I think right now our hands are tied. There's not, the manufacturers in this country were forced to go out of business a long time ago when China took over. And it's, as much as our president says, bring manufacturing back to the US, those manufacturers don't exist.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take a while for manufacturers to come back to the US and to build that infrastructure again. And until that happens, I think our hands are a little bit tied. I hate to say.
Yeah.
I think the ability to bring manufacturing back here is stunted for the moment.
Yeah. I would agree with that. But I love that you have found your way in your little bubble of the world
In
to,
my little bubble, in my
yeah.
little ways.
Yeah, to do what you can. I think that the fact that you're conscious about it in a way that not everyone is pretty
Encourage
beautiful to
it.
see.
We
Yeah.
can encourage it, and certainly I try and promote the use of our friends and colleagues here in the US, and I try to encourage our brands to use as much US manufacturers as we can, and the people that we want to keep in business here in the garment district, and keep the garment district alive as much as we can. And those
Yeah.
industries, those cottage industries that are dying.
Yeah. You out there fighting the good fight.
I'm fighting for us.
I love it. So, what's next for Raylene? What's next for Dynamics? What are you excited
Well,
about?
we have so many exciting projects. We are so fortunate to do fine art and film and television, and we work on The Lion King and
Oh,
Aladdin all over the world. And
fun.
We just finished the tour for Water for Elephants, which is out on tour.
Wow,
And that's
congrats.
super fun. We get to do distressing and aging of costumes. So we might be doing a beautiful dress for a runway or a red carpet gala. And then we're distressing garments to make them look old and dirty at the same time. And we do conservation for museums all over the world, which is super exciting. So, talk about preserving history. We just recently worked on the famous Degas dancer for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I'm sure that
Wow.
you're familiar with that
I believe I've
sculpture.
heard of
Yes. And that was
Wow.
so amazing for me because we've worked on a lot of historic garments for them. But when I was presented that project, it was such an amazing project because it's so iconic. And so
Yeah.
when I was walking through the museum and normally I'm in the conservation department with their technicians, and the conservator said, "Oh, well, let's go upstairs. That's our next project, is actually in the museum." I was a little confused because normally it's in their department. And we, walked through each velvet rope, which is normally, the museum was closed, and it is like it is in the movies, everything's roped off, and we kept walking through each room, and we get to the room with the Degas, and he said, "Well, that's our next project." And I sort of gasped, "Oh, really? The Degas, dancer, the famous dancer." And he said, "Well, we're gonna restore it and change it and make it more historically accurate." So that was really a beautiful, beautiful project. So and quite exciting. So
Yeah.
we're always working. It's the diversity of the projects that we're working on. We're working on operas. We're working on a fine art project for finishing something up for the new museum for Judy Chicago. We're working on Aladdin. We're working on Lion King. We're working on, so many different projects. It's quite exciting. So never a dull moment, never the same day twice around here.
Seriously. Man, your brain must work overtime to go from like 1 second we're on this period piece, the next second we're on Lion King, like two completely different
Absolutely.
things.
We're very fortunate that we get to do that. And I don't know, maybe I never thought of myself having, ADD or anything, but I think maybe I do. And I like the excitement of just different projects and new people coming in all the time, and new artists and new projects and new collaborations. So always exciting to work with new projects.
Yeah, it seems to suit you. You seem to have all the balls that you're juggling in the air, and they all seem to
Lots
still
of
be up there.
energy,
Yeah,
lots of energy, lots of passion for the
absolutely.
work. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap, one final question. If you could
Yes.
leave one thread, one message, or practice for the next generation of artists to carry forward, what would that be?
I think being true to yourself, I think, is the message. Having a point of view is so important. And I think, honestly, just staying true to yourself, because you will always find eventually an audience that believes in you. And just staying true to who you are as a person, and then finding the people that believe in that message, as opposed to trying to change who you are for someone else. Find the audience that believes and loves you,
Yeah,
instead of changing to be somebody else.
I love that. Beautiful.
That's
Yeah,
that's the message.
yeah. I love
You'll
it.
find the people that believe in you.
You will find your people. You will
You'll find
absolutely
your
find your
people.
people. Yeah. Raylene, thank you so much for the time. This has been fun.
Thank you. This is my pleasure. My pleasure to talk about what I love and am so fortunate to do every day.
Raylene's story is such a beautiful reminder that creativity is about curiosity. It's about staying open to what color, process, and collaboration can teach us. At Threads of Voices and Mentor a Promise, we believe creativity can truly change lives, helping people rewrite their stories and their futures, one stitch at a time. You can find more of Raylene's work at Dyenamix.com, and don't forget to follow us for new episodes. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep finding the threads that connect us all.